photography is a big niche on YouTube. And Eric Floberg is one of my favorite YouTubers in that niche. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing him. So Eric, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, man, it's a pleasure to be on here. Thanks for having me. My name's Eric Floberg. I'm based out of Chicago in the US, and I've been doing wedding photography and filmmaking for 10 years now. I just had my 10-year anniversary, the first wedding I ever filmed this 1st of July. So
Wow.
been doing it for a decade, and yeah, I started a YouTube channel like 4 years ago. At least seriously, I had a bunch of goofy videos for when I was like a teenager and stuff. But yeah, now that's become about half of my career. So about half of it is photographing and filming weddings and doing portraits and some commercial work. And then the other side is YouTube.
Great. Who inspired you to start YouTube?
To start YouTube, my biggest inspiration was probably my friends Daniel and Rachel at Mango Street. If you've seen their work, they used to live in Chicago. And so I went to a random meetup back in, I think, 2014 or 2015, and they happened to be there. And at that time, they were like suggested, it used to be called suggested users on Instagram. So they like got thousands and thousands of followers on Instagram. And I think I had already been following them and didn't really realize who they were until like we opened up our Instagrams after we had been chatting a while. I went over to Daniel because he was like flying his drone, and that was the first time I'd ever seen a drone in real life, which is nuts. And we befriended each other and just kept up online until then I filmed or photographed a wedding with Daniel in Thailand in Asia. So we got to know each other more there. And it was that trip. It was my first time to LA, first time to China, and then to Thailand. And in that, I was kind of obsessing over Casey Neistat a little bit, as a lot of people did.
Who
And
hasn't?
I was making some vlogs. So, trying to do that whole thing, trying to be a Casey Neistat copycat. But then I saw them kind of creating this own thing on YouTube. And I was like, you could do other things, like they were doing photography tutorials. I'm like, well, they just do photography tutorials. Well, I shoot weddings, so maybe I can make some content about the business side and how I do that. So then Rachel just kind of was like, now you need to like do it more, just do more, spend more time on it. So I started doing that more, and then it turned into a business.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And now that same question, but with like photography and filming, like who inspired you to do those things?
Yeah. So much earlier when I was in college, I found this photographer named Benj Heish, and he's based out of Seattle in the US. And I was so obsessed with his work. What's funny is I didn't even have Instagram back then. I just followed his blog and his Facebook page. And to me, he was like a celebrity because I was trying to be him basically at that point. And this was back in like 2011, 2012, 2013, and really kept up with his work. We hired him to photograph our wedding. And that was when I started, photographing and filming weddings, up to like 5 to 10 a year. And yeah, it was just kind of that copycat mentality that like helped me actually learn what my style actually was, because I would try things that he would do, or I would see different creative things he tried and then put my own spin on it. And yeah, he just ended up being the catalyst for that. So then in 2016, I went to a workshop where he was one of the teachers, along with a lot of other people that I followed on Instagram, and I was fanboying. I was like, oh man, all these people. And some of those people were like Jonas Peterson and Max Wanger, Krista Marie Parker. And yeah, I think that workshop too was also me realizing, okay, I need to go full time with this and do my own thing.
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned like your photography business. For the people that don't know you, could you explain like what you do in your photography business?
Yeah. So yeah, the majority of my photography work is, like I said, weddings. But with that, at this point, I'm trying to shoot like maybe 15 per year. But I do about half photography and then half filmmaking. So filming or photographing weddings. But then I also have 2 associates under my brand. Jesse, who's my wedding filmmaker associate, and then I have Steven, who is my wedding photography associate. So whenever I'm not available or a couple has a different budget than what my prices are, then I might hire them to do work as well for my brand. So that's a big part of my brand. And then around town, like I live in Chicago, so sometimes I'll do different jobs with small commercial shoots, like for small businesses around town, or I have connections with people where I do some commercial work, especially on the video side. For brands like furniture brands, or there's some work I do for a chiropractor down the street, some more local stuff as well. But that's about half of my business. And then the other half is dedicated to my YouTube channel and making consistent content there, as well as my Patreon, where people pay a monthly $10 a month to get extra content from me.
Is it difficult for you like balancing like these three things?
Dude, that's a great question. Yeah, it is. It's really hard. Everyone kept asking me this question earlier this year because we had started a podcast. We started a podcast called Rally Caps. Me and my friend Mike started a finance YouTube channel called Eric and Mike. I was keeping up with my YouTube channel. I had started a running YouTube channel in the fall. It was just like, I literally had like 10 things going at once, and everyone's like, how are you doing this? And my answer kept being like, hey, community, like all the people around me are helping support me in doing this. And I'm partnering with people in this process. Now, some of those things have like stayed healthy and have been good. Like Rally Caps, we've been really consistent because Steven is just so good at like being consistent, and he produces the podcast. But even just recently with Mike and our finance channel, we realized it was affecting our friendship. So we're like, you know what? Let's just put a pause on this, because we don't need that to hurt our actual friendship. And it's not worth it if we feel like business is going to get in the way of our personal lives. So I actually recently, just this past week, hired someone. His name is Braxton. He's been a longtime viewer of my YouTube channel. He just moved from the southern part of the US, from Mississippi up to Chicago, showing me he was very serious about wanting to work in our studio and be a part of everything. And my latest YouTube video that just was released today was shot and edited mostly by him, which is really exciting. So now I'm able to start outsourcing some of this stuff and take a lot of that pressure off of me, so that I can be more of the creative mind and the business person that I want to be. So yeah, that's where I'm at now.
Very interesting. Like, you have shot a lot of weddings. Which one has like been like your favorite?
That's a great question, man. It's hard to pick one specific favorite. I think I'll mention that after I say this. Really, like a lot of people will in the wedding space might say like, oh, my favorite wedding was in this crazy cool location because we went to these mountains at sunset, and like this epic whatever. That's great. Like I really enjoy that too, which is funny because like one of my favorite weddings was like that. But I think ultimately what I care about most and what I've learned over the past decade is just, I really love weddings where the philosophy lines up with what I do and what I care about and what is important that I think a wedding day is about. Because a lot of times, especially in American culture, it tends to be like this huge event where like they have to impress everybody, and it's like all these flowers and the food and all this stuff, and they're spending just tens of thousands of dollars. And I walk away from some of those and I go like, man, but do you guys love each other? Like, I don't know. Like it's weird to me that like you guys like don't have that connection. So those from time to time like frustrate me more. What I love is sometimes I just love really simple weddings where they don't really plan all that much, and it's just things that they love to do. And I had one out in Seattle where it was just their family, and they hung out and had a picnic, and it was just very beautiful because they were very much in love. And I just love simple stuff like that. So I guess one of my favorite weddings I ever shot was this couple where we went to Yosemite, and they're from Chicago, and Yosemite is out in California, like one of the coolest places on earth. I'm sure you've seen photos and videos of it.
I went there and it was like amazing.
Isn't it unreal? It's just like you stare at El
Yeah.
Capitan and you're just like, how is this real?
Like my biggest regret there is like I only have like two pictures there because like I I don't know what happened, but like I did like this thing where like taking a hike and I think I hit my head on like a tree or something. Wasn't looking and I wasn't in a bad mood the whole like rest of the
uh,
trip. So I only wasn't like two pictures, but yeah.
that stinks. Yeah, it's
I still made like a YouTube video on it, so I still have some memories there.
awesome. Yeah, it's mind blowing to be in the valley and just experience it all, especially like at sunset. Um, what was really cool and different about that wedding was it was one where I knew that it could traject my career into a new realm, like into a new level. And so since that was the case, since the story was so good, since these two were just so in love and uh so passionate about being married in such a cool place, I was like, I need to go all out. So I filmed over the course of like 4 days while we were there. I was doing time lapses. We woke up at 3 a.m. to go to sunrise um, at Glacier Point, and just like, oh, it was so awesome. And I even like filmed them at home in Chicago, like packing for the trip and incorporating it into the film, just to create something that was so different than any other wedding film you would ever see. And that ended up being something that helped me book so many more weddings that kind of wanted that same thing, where it's like we're not looking for something that's just the average. Like we're not looking for something that is similar to what everybody else has, but like we have this unique story and we want you to put your artistic talents on it and tell the story. So yeah.
Yeah, I have like a couple like funny stories. I want to
Let's
make it to
hear it,
like
man.
YouTube videos. I'll say one of those here because it's probably one of the stories out by now.
Yes.
But we were just like chilling, like we rented a cabin. And we're chilling in the cabin, and we're just talking. And I don't know why, I just turned to the door. And I see the door. I look down, and I see like a small mouse like playing like my dad's shoes. And I was like, "Oh, that's playing in the shoes," and everyone's like, well, my mom, and my sister scream, and I also was like surprised, and it was very funny.
That's awesome, man.
And then like the rest of the night, me and my sister were like annoying each other. Oh, the rat's gonna come up in your bed and bite your toes, like as if it's something. But yeah,
Man, Nico, let me say though, I'm really impressed at. We talked about this before we started the Zoom call, because you're asking like, what made you want to come on? I'm like, man,
yeah,
I think a lot of adults that like you interview probably see themselves in you, like doing what you're doing and being excited and passionate. And it's like having these ideas of like, oh, this would make such a good YouTube video, or like I had this experience. But even with the small thing you said about Yosemite, where it's like I had a frustrating time because like I hit my head and it was like, I was in a bad mood, but I still have all of these videos as a memory. And that's something I'm really passionate about too, because I have a family, and some of my YouTube videos, I do montages like of my family with photographs and different short films that I make. And I'm just like, I feel so happy and so blessed to have that stuff, because it's just like this catalog and a library of my life. And when I'm old and gray, like I'm hoping YouTube is still a thing, and like these videos will still be on the internet, and I get to experience my life and all the things that I made. So it's just really cool that you're starting this young, and you're talking to all these people who have also experienced it, who are like twice your age.
thank
So
you.
it's really cool, man.
And it's like I've been doing YouTube for more than half of my life, so it's like tons of videos.
That's
Um,
wild, man.
I started when I was 5, and
Jeez.
as I'm recording this, I'm 12. This is probably coming out like 2 weeks before my birthday because
Yeah.
I'm like booked on guests until September. I'm like so full.
Wow.
Um, but yeah, and like one thing I'm kind of annoyed at is like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I'd like deleted like from my second video to like tons of videos, and I'm just so mad at myself for like doing that.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and I don't know why I just did it private then. But yeah,
Right.
but I still have like so many more like videos of like me and my friend like playing Minecraft for like 1 hour, like just
Yeah.
like playing and tons of other stuff that I'm glad I didn't delete. But yeah.
For sure. Yeah. It's always great to just be able to look back at that stuff. And if you keep doing YouTube, it's really valuable to keep all that stuff, because as the years go on and you talk more about your story and your past, it's really awesome to be able to go back to those videos and show them to people who might feel inspired by like where you came from and what you're doing now. I think people who follow your podcast now might even be inspired to see some of those videos when you were young, like whatever ones you didn't delete, that are way back
Yeah.
there.
Because
And
most of them are public. Like the only ones that are private are like the one. There's a couple more, but like some are unlisted. But like all the ones that are mostly private are like the 1 hour long Minecraft videos, because I'm
yeah,
not gonna watch the whole thing just to see what I said, because who knows. But yeah,
could I ask you a couple other questions? Is that cool?
go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, this is really broad and you can answer however you like, but like, what do you, I'm sure people have asked you this, like, what do you see your career being? Like, what does that look like 5 to 10 years from now? What do you see yourself doing?
So it was like, if you would ask me these questions like 5 years ago, which was 2 years into YouTube, I would have said YouTuber. A year after, I would have said actor, and like 2 years later, I would have said movie producer, and now
Yeah.
it's like podcaster, which
Yeah.
is like so weird. But yeah, I definitely like either podcasting or like making movies on YouTube or like in the movie theater or something like that. But I still always want to like keep doing YouTube. Yeah.
I think the great thing right now is when you have those at your age and like as your kid, like doing all those things just develops your skills on like what you're capable of doing, and you keep learning all these different things so that by the time you're out of school and you're doing your own thing, you're going to have
I have so many
so many
options.
skills. Yeah, like
Mhm.
you'll be able to do whatever you want, and you'll have a platform that you already started building. So that's just so cool, man.
Yeah, and like let's say I have 1 million subscribers by the time I'm out of college, and I'll always have like a community behind me. Like depends one thing I do. Let's say I decide to stop podcasting and move on to something else. I know I'll have at least like 10,000 people that will support me. So
Yep. Yep.
I'll always
That's
have
so
like a
cool, man.
jump start if I like move to a different thing. If that makes sense.
Gotcha. You said you're in Cancun right now. Did you
Yes.
grow up in Cancun?
Yes. Cancun, then like in a town close to Miami.
Gotcha. Entonces hablas español o no?
Sí.
Okay. I'm not gonna do any more than that because I'll embarrass myself. Okay.
Don't worry, don't worry.
Awesome, man.
Did you have any more questions or should I
I
continue?
do have one more.
All right.
How'd you get Ali Abdal on your podcast, man?
It's like a funny story. Because I was like looking for guests to get on my podcast. And I was looking at my list and I saw Ali Abdal on my list. I was like, okay, I'll watch like some old Ali Abdal videos and see if I can find like his email, something like that.
Yeah.
I found like 3 different emails, which is very weird. I sent all of them, no response. And then I was like scrolling down and I saw like he had like a series, I think he still does it, where he like interviews people like live. And my brother was in one of those.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, my brother knows Ali Abdallah. That's like a music connection. I'll like annoy my brother to see if he can get him on my podcast. So I like messaged my brother, hey, could you connect me with Ali Abdallah? He said, yeah. And then let me look at the email. And then like a couple like 10 minutes later, I got an email with like email chain between me, Ali Abdallah, and my brother. And then I just like we agreed on a time and then we recorded it. But yeah.
So awesome, man.
But yeah, it's like very weird because like sometimes I notice I know someone who knows someone else, and like, I can get them on my podcast.
Totally. Yeah, we're like when we started Rally Caps, we wanted to take advantage of all the people I knew already from YouTube and the connections I've made with growing my channel. But Ollie's definitely one of those people we wanted to get on Rally Caps. So I'm like, man, I gotta pick Nico's brain, see how he did it. And it's like I know I probably have some friends that like know who he is and all that stuff. So
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, he's a very nice guy, and I've gotten like a couple of guests. There's actually one guest which was a very similar story, with Zach and Jay from the Zach and Jay show. I don't know if you know
Okay.
them. They're
Hmm.
like these British YouTubers, which was a very similar story. But
Yeah.
yeah,
So cool, man. Okay, that's all the
yeah.
questions I have for you.
All right. If you have any more, just let me know and I'll answer
Sounds
them.
good.
Now kind of back to like your wedding business. So you mentioned early on that like you prefer like these simpler weddings,
Mm,
to take photo to take photos
photograph.
of.
Yep. Hmm.
Yeah. Um, is like a simple wedding your ideal wedding, like to talk to take pictures of?
Photograph. Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think I care more now. I don't necessarily care about location, size, any of that stuff, any of like the numbers or the logistical things. I don't care so much about that. I just care that the couple that comes to me lines up with all the things that I believe in with shooting weddings. So, for example, I just had a couple recently that came in, and what's funny now is a lot of my clients are finding me on YouTube. Like they're other creative style people. They've been following my YouTube channel and they're like, we're getting married now. And I know that Eric is really intentional about the way he photographs and the way he films weddings. So they come to me. And then, if we have a face-to-face meeting, I always in that meeting talk about my philosophy and like this is why I do what I do. And ultimately, I just want to be there to serve you on your wedding day and to give you photos that are just going to last your whole lifetime and you could pass down to your children and pass down to your grandkids and just make this legacy for you. And so usually if they're on board with that and they're interested in hiring me for what I cost as an investment in that so that they have those things to cherish for their whole lives, like that's what I care about most, where we line up on that vision. And then everything else is like, I don't care, like do whatever you want to do and I'll be there and I'll show up and I'll shoot it. So yeah.
Yeah, if I were like taking photographing like weddings, I'd also focus on that.
Hmm.
But now I'm moving on to the other side of like favorite like weddings to shoot. Well, what would be like what has been like the worst experience while shooting a wedding?
Oh man. I honestly am very fortunate I haven't had many bad experiences. Like no nightmare stories, I don't think. One of the first weddings I ever shot, we filmed the ceremony and me and my friend were driving to the reception and we realized about 20 minutes into the drive that we were driving the wrong way. So
No.
so the wedding reception was they didn't start it because we weren't there yet. So we turned around and my friend was driving and he just floored it. He was going as fast as he could. And this was in the middle of like farmland, Illinois. So like we're just driving through cornfields, just like 75, 80 miles an hour, just flying. And there was one part in the road where there was a bump and he went super fast over the bump and we went airborne and landed. And the car like swiveled and then it went back and I was like,
Oh my
don't
god.
do that again. And we showed up to the reception. They're like, okay, are you ready to go? We're like, yeah, let's just throw the stuff together. And then we filmed the reception and everything was fine. So but it was
Wow.
pretty unprofessional, I guess. That was like the third wedding I ever shot.
I can imagine that was like a very like terrifying, like
Yeah,
nervous and like funny experience.
totally. It was before I had a smartphone. So we didn't have Google Maps. We were just going off directions that were like written on paper or printed out or something. And so at that time, I think people were a lot more understanding, like if you got
Yeah.
lost on your way to the reception or whatever. So yeah,
And now it's like
there's no excuse.
Google tells you to go that way. Why do you go
Exactly.
that way?
Yeah, exactly.
If I was in that same situation, like with different friends, I'd act differently.
Hmm.
Like there'd be like friends where I'd be screaming at them. There'd be
Totally.
friends where we'd just be like laughing like so
Uh-huh.
hard. And there'd be friends where I'd just be like calm. But yeah.
This was one of those friends where I was very nervous while he was driving that fast. I was not comfortable.
Anyways, moving on. what's kind of like the process of shooting a wedding?
Yeah, it's different when it's photo versus video. They're two very different things.
Yeah.
Photo, in my opinion, is much easier to edit. So, like on the day, it's a lot more stressful to shoot because a lot of times the photographer tends to be the leader of the day, where there's a timeline and a schedule, but you're kind of the person responsible to take everybody through that timeline and make sure you're getting to places on time, and you're directing a bus driver or getting everybody to the reception on time and organizing family photos. So you're kind of in charge in that. Whereas filmmaking, the video side, you're kind of just like allowing the photographer to do that, and you're just kind of filming natural interactions and not really posing people as much. So that's kind of how the process is between the two and how they're different. But then on the back end, when you have to edit, photo tends to be a lot easier, something you can fly through in a day or two. Whereas the film, for me, I make a 4 to 6 minute montage that's packed with audio and music and like all like couple of days of shooting if I went all out. And so that takes me like a full week, a full work week to like edit one of those films. And it's much more stressful because it takes so much more creative energy to make that.
Mhm.
So they both kind of have their balances, if that makes sense.
I can imagine if I was struggling with like a video which was like the my best of like my content from 2020, which took me like a whole day to make it. I can
Hmm.
imagine like struggling on that, like how much like more harder it is to like do something like what editing a wedding.
Yeah, and especially because this film is like so important to them, and they're gonna have it for the rest of their lives,
Exactly.
and they paid you a lot of money to make it, so you're just like, it's got to be perfect, you know. And so at this point in my career, I'm starting to realize that I don't have to put 100% of my energy into every single film, because if I did that, it's going to make me burn out. um, and so I need to understand that my 80 to 90%, like almost perfect, is totally perfect to them. Like
Exactly.
they really really still love and cherish that, and that still keeps me healthy. You know.
And like I'm not expecting a lot of people unless they're like really into like editing videos, they'll notice like the small details. So
Exactly. Yeah.
but anyways, like how did you start your photography business, and how can someone that's probably watching this video start their own?
Yeah. I was always the kid that made videos. So starting in
I
seventh
am that
grade,
kid.
yup, starting in 7th grade when I was 12, I had a Spanish class project, and we just made this dumb video called The Telephone Man, and it was based on vocabulary we were learning in Spanish class. You know, and I mean, if you rewatch it, it doesn't make any sense. Like we didn't really know Spanish at all, but we were trying to use these vocabulary words. But we spent a whole week and a weekend like filming and editing this video. And it was my friend Chris who he had Windows Movie Maker on his PC at home, and I had no idea that you could edit a video on a computer. Like that was the first time I had realized. And he had like this little microphone where he could do voiceovers and all this stuff. And I was like, this is mind blowing. And so every year after that, I had to make a class project with a video. Like I always convinced my teachers, like it was a written project, but I was like, can I turn it into a video project? And they're like, I guess, sure.
I do that
And
sometimes.
so,
I'm like,
oh yeah,
instead of like writing, can I make it into a video?
like can I
And
script it and then speak to camera? Yeah,
yeah, and like something that happens in my class, it's like whenever there's a group project and they're like, all right, who's gonna edit the video? Everyone just instantly, Nico,
Nico.
everyone, like everyone's been in like my group just so I can edit it.
Totally. Are your teachers like really impressed with everything that you have going on with the podcast?
Yes, actually, in like the graduation, because in Mexico it's weird. Like sixth grade is still a like elementary school,
Right.
so I
Yeah.
technically
Same
like just
with where I was. Yeah. Middle school
yeah.
was 7th and 8th for us. Yeah.
So like I technically just graduated, and the teacher was like, they didn't say like the name until like the end. So it was like, this student has an ability with cameras and has made some amazing videos throughout the year, blah, blah, blah. And everyone was like, the moment they said camera, everyone just turned to me, and I'm like,
And looked at you.
yeah. And we also did like this like ending year like video, and when the teacher was, who's gonna edit it? Everyone turned on their microphone and said Nico, which was so funny.
That's
But
awesome,
yeah.
man. Yeah, I mean, and so year after year, I was making these videos. So I got really comfortable with making and editing videos at home. And after I graduated high school and went to college, I just made goofy videos with my friends in college. We like, wrote and shot all these skits that were funny. We shared with all our friends and we posted them on Facebook. And because I posted those online on Facebook and YouTube, I had a friend from high school who told me that her sister was getting married and they were looking to have a videographer. They didn't have one yet. And she's like, "What would you charge?" And I was like, $300. I don't know. That sounds like a good amount of money. And so they said yes. And that was the first wedding I ever shot. And that was 10 years ago last week, and
Wow.
and I ended up photographing her other two sisters' weddings over the years. So I photographed Lisa's 3 years ago, and then I photographed that friend Jenny's wedding last summer. And
That's so
I got to
cool.
see my first couple that I filmed, and they have 4 kids now, and that's really cool. But like that kind of launched me into like I posted that wedding film and that wedding trailer online, and then the next friend was like, "Oh, I saw you do wedding filmmaking. Were you interested in it?" And I was like, "Sure, yeah, no, I charge $800, And it was just this stair step climbing, like slowly but surely, word of mouth referrals and posting stuff online and showing people like, hey, this is what I do. And my biggest piece of advice is like, I have this phrase that I always use on YouTube: lean into what makes you different. And the same kind of story I talked about with Yosemite, it's like, what can you do with your skill set, especially you, Nico, if you wanted to get into filming weddings? Like, once you were at that place where you wanted to do that, what kind of skills could you use that you already have to then make that wedding film something different than everybody in your area does? Like, what could you do and what kind of spin could you put on it where when you put it online, everyone goes, oh my gosh, like they're sharing it. They're literally like taking the URL and like texting it to people, or like sharing it, resharing it on wherever. What component can you do like that? Because that kind of organic reach is your marketing. Like that will then prove to everybody, I do this and I do it well, hire me. And so yeah, once there's enough of that, then you get to the place where it's like, all right, I can go full time with this. There's enough business coming in, and then you start making connections with other photographers, other vendors, planners, like all these people, and then you just start getting tons of inquiries.
That's so cool. I actually have like a funny story where I kind of like, it wasn't like a wedding, it was like these like two like retiros. I don't know what they're called in English.
What was
Like
it?
retiros. Let me search it.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I don't know either. In English. No, it's just retirement, but it's not like retirement. It's like a. Anyways, I'll just leave it on the side. But
All good.
my mom was doing like this thing, where it was kind of like a course, but like an in-person course.
Workshop.
And yeah, it was like a workshop like across a couple days.
Yeah.
So kind of like a camp and workshop.
Yeah.
And like I like filmed and photographed the pictures of two of those. I charged like $40. But
awesome.
And I also edited them and they turned out horrible. But it was like the simplest thing ever, like only cuts and then like music.
Yeah.
It was like the worst thing. But yeah, it was very funny.
But you have to try stuff like that, right? Like
Exactly.
you have to get out there and like see what you can do. And something like that is really good to do because it's like they paid you a little bit of money. It might not be the best thing ever, but you get the practice,
And I got to go out of school like 1 hour earlier.
Nice. Benefits.
And everyone was like, "Oh, what are you going to do? What are you going to do?" And I was like, "I'm getting paid to take a
You're like,
video
I'm
or
just doing my
something."
job. No big
Exactly. So you have like been photographing weddings for like 10 years and like and all this stuff. Not counting like your worst experience, which was like the car thing. What has been like the biggest obstacle?
The biggest obstacle for me, and it tends to be the biggest obstacle for a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people who run their own business, is just trying to manage a normal life while growing a business. It can, as you heard earlier, when I'm like starting and doing 10 things all at once, it can become very overwhelming very quickly. And burnout is a very real thing that people experience in the stuff that I do, you know, whether it be YouTube or wedding photography, wedding filmmaking, podcasting, all this stuff. When you put too much on your plate and you don't take care of yourself, um, that's when it just becomes really, really difficult to be creative, to enjoy what you're doing because you're just miserable. And I had a season of that this year where we were buying a new home, we were renting out our last home as a condo to somebody else. I had to get a new car. It was just like all these things all happening at once. We got a new studio. It's a hot mess. As you can see behind me, it's just all messy. And it just felt very, very
That's one
stressful.
of the reasons I have a blur behind
The
me.
blurred background. You should see my desk behind me. It's just everything is a mess. We just have the one light, so it looks like it's sort of clean.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's like a perfect vision of just kind of how my life has been the past 4 or 5 months. And it's finally starting to round a corner because I finally started feeling okay with putting a pause on some things and just taking things one step at a time. And so I think that's the biggest obstacle that a lot of people find themselves in. It's like so many people are first searching for success. They're like, hey, I want to be profitable. I want to have a company that's like, you know, making six figures, or, you know, like I want to be there. And then once they get there, they're just like, I'm stressed out. There's a meme that's been passed around recently. It's like, um, I left my 9 to 5 job. Basically, I left my normal job so that I can now work all the time, you know? And it's like, it doesn't, it doesn't really make sense what we do to ourselves sometimes when we're our own boss, you know? So it's just something I'm constantly trying to teach people who are creatives. Just like make sure you're taking care of yourself first. Make sure you have a community of people around you, whether it's your family or your friends, that are kind of keeping you in check and making sure that like you're not spreading yourself too thin.
I just don't know how I haven't like burned out in like these like 7 years of doing it, because in like 11 days it's like my seventh year, like 7 or 6 year doing YouTube. It's like so crazy.
Yeah.
And like I have never taken like a break for more than like 2 weeks. Like the
Mm-hmm.
only break was like at a summer camp where I technically couldn't upload, which
Mm-hmm.
is like weird how I haven't like taken a break and like
Mm-hmm.
never gotten tired of this.
Yeah, it's really easy to do when you're young. Like it just is. Even up until your 20s, like into your mid 20s, I've realized, and yeah, I mean, everybody's experience is different, but now that I'm turning 30 this month and feeling very old, you know, feeling very
Happy early
outdated.
birthday.
Thank you. Um, but yeah, it's just this, my life feels like it's finally starting to slow down a bit. Like we're having our fourth kid in September. So
Congrats.
thanks. Yeah. So we're gonna be a family of six. And I really step back in that and I go, do I really want my life to be so wrapped up in work? Like my kids are only this age at this time and I only get to enjoy it for this amount of time. So I would much rather like be okay with making less money, being less successful than I could be, if that means I get to enjoy all the time I can with my family, you know? Um, and so it's a matter of like, what do you want your life to be? You know, what makes you happy in that process? And some people can totally just like hammer out content every week with a consistent schedule and do it within these confined hours and still have a wonderful, healthy personal life. For me, I'm not a very organized person, so it's really hard for me to keep work at work and keep my personal life with my personal life. It tends to cross between each other all the time. So I'm just trying to take better steps at like getting myself more organized and making sure that I prioritize all the things that are important to me.
Yeah, and it's just better to like take care of yourself and then like do other things.
Totally. And I'm a huge fan of running. I love running. I run marathons, but my ankle's been really messed up the past like 8 months. So that's been really depressing for me that I can't go out and run, but I'm finally doing physical therapy and like taking care of myself so that I can get back to running. And I'm all signed up. I'm signed up for the New York Marathon this November, so I'm really excited about that.
I'm excited to see you run. I'm not going, but
Yeah, I'll make a video for sure.
oh, very cool. And back to like the community thing you mentioned, like surrounding yourself with people. I feel like I'm very lucky because I have like big creators who have been doing this for around the same time as me, or like, probably even longer.
Yeah.
That I'm like one like DM, one like message away from however stuck. So I feel like that's something my podcast has allowed me to like do and surround myself with more people. Because
Totally.
before I had like this friend who did YouTube, then quit because he wasn't growing. Like same with some other friends, but yeah.
Yeah, but you said it too, like the relationships that you build, like with your brother through Ollie, like those are the kinds of relationships that end up giving you opportunities, like building those connections and those relationships with people and treating people the right way can really lend the ability for you to connect with so many other people. I had another big YouTuber, I commented on one of his videos and he was just like, oh man, I've loved like listening to Rally Caps. And I was like, what? It blew my mind that like someone of that status was listening to our podcast. I was like, that's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
It's like a similar reaction when people I interview say, yeah, I've listened to a couple of your stuff and I love it. I'm like, oh my God, what other videos did they watch? Did they go like very far back? Did they watch the good ones? Did they watch the bad ones?
That's awesome.
But yeah,
man.
just like knowing someone of like that status, like watches your stuff, is like, oh my God, like that's so cool.
It is really cool. Yeah, we live in really live in a unique time where anybody and everybody can see what you put out on the web. So yeah, you never know.
You never know who's watching.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Will Smith is watching this interview. He probably isn't, but
I don't know, man. You have a good thing going for you. I wouldn't
exactly.
count it out, man. Your line in the email that says I might be the youngest podcaster in the world, like that is so good. That got my attention right away. I was like, what?
And like the annoying thing about it is like in a couple months, like 3 months, I'm gonna have to take that out. Which I won't be the world's youngest podcaster. So I might change it to like I was the former world's youngest podcast owner or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
or like the 13-year-old podcaster or whatever.
Yeah. And it's technically I'm not official, but there isn't anyone else younger than me doing it, basically. Yeah, the other one, like it was 12 too. He had like a fire truck podcast. But I technically started when I was 11, so I was younger. Wow. But yeah. And I've applied to like the Guinness World Records, but they both said no. Well, the 2 times I applied, I said no. But yeah.
Jeez, man. That's so cool. It doesn't even matter if they said no. It's just so
exactly.
Cool.
It's like a thing that I could say. At one point in my life, I was the world's youngest podcast owner.
That's so cool, man.
Anyways, moving on. In your business, you do photo and video. If you were to stick to one, which one would it be?
Great question. And I get asked this one a lot too. I really don't have an answer. At the end of the day, it'd probably be video, which would break my heart because photography is, out of they're my 2 biggest passions, artistically. So the reason I say video is just because of the ability to appeal to more of the senses, to be able to appeal to vision and audio, being able to tell stories. I think I love the component of emotional connection and human connection in stuff that I make. And it is far easier to communicate a message through video that someone can understand. It's harder to make, but it's easier to interpret. Which is an argument for photography being profound too, because if you could do that through one single image or a series of images, that's really powerful as well. But for me, creatively, if I had to pick one, it would probably be filmmaking. And if I did that, I feel like I would make much better films, honestly, because I would be dedicating so much more time to like making sure that it's super high quality. So
yeah, and I personally I find it a lot more fun like video because like it's a long process and you're like working up to
Hmm.
like the final project, which is like
Hmm.
the video like completely done.
Hmm. Yeah, but I really enjoy film photography as well. I shoot my personal life on film. So
Hmm.
we started developing and scanning our own film in the studio, which has been amazing. So I'm really passionate about that too, because it doesn't make you do what digital photography makes you do, where you just like are always pressing the shutter. There's a consequence every time you press the shutter with a film photo, because you're like spending 80 cents like every time you do that, and you have to be really careful, because if you're not careful, your images are going to be bad and you're wasting money. So it really makes you intentional about the process and care about what you're photographing.
Something you like need to like take these videos and photos is equipment. You made a
Mhm.
video this like recently. Do you think like equipment is like needed?
Yeah, yeah. The fallacy, the whole joke about that video was me setting up a ton of really expensive gear, and then the punchline is
Three
gear
hundred
doesn't
dollar
matter.
mic, like a
Yeah.
huge camera. Equipment doesn't
Um,
matter.
right. It's so, and that video went viral, I think for good reason, because it resonated with so many people being frustrated with like people who have a ton of expensive gear that have all this stuff at their fingertips, saying that gear doesn't matter. It doesn't make much sense. Uh, I understand the message. And there are a lot of people who have made follow-up videos and breakdown videos talking about this message, more of just like gear isn't gear isn't the problem, or like breaking it down, and like your mindset is really the thing that matters most. It's like you could be Casey Neistat running around with a 60D crop sensor DSLR, or like a point and shoot, or just your phone. There's people on TikTok who have an insane talent with music, and they're just recording right on their iPhone in a bedroom. And there is that component of the internet. um but what requires that to like do really well is like all of the things that aren't gear. So script writing and acting and singing and performance and all these other skills that allow you, good storytelling, like all these things that allow you to make something that's captivating without expensive gear. The expensive gear actually allows you to be lazy, kind of like you can make it look really, really pretty and sound really, really good, but the script can kind of just be like, eh. But then everybody's still like watching it and commenting like, oh, so buttery, like so
The
good,
camera
so
quality, the audio
so
is so
sick,
crisp.
so
Yeah.
crispy. Um, to me, that feels kind of shallow. It's like, okay, like if you have money and you can buy that stuff, like that's great. But I'm more interested in like, as someone who has all the expensive gear, like I'm more interested in trying to connect those two worlds, where it's like, look at what Hollywood films do. They have insane script writing, insane acting, beautiful visuals, flawless audio. It's just everything is fine tuned.
Hmm.
What would it look like for us to just slow down and continue to use whatever gear we have, and tell a story and write a script and do all those things behind the scenes really well, as well, with what we have, to try to communicate a message to as many people as we can, trying to reach them with that message or that story. um, Much more concerned with that. um, but at the same time, like I have all the expensive gear because I've done the work. Like I've shot hundreds of weddings and have been paid to do so. So I've slowly, you know climbed that staircase of being able to afford more and more expensive and better gear. But ultimately that's just used as a conduit or something that is going to enhance the story and what the writing is more, if that makes sense.
And just like imagine showing up to a wedding with no cameras and you're like taking photos on your phone.
Yeah,
They're gonna think you're
doesn't really work.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except I did have friends that they shot an elopement in the desert on an iPhone, and it was actually incredible. So it's possible, but I think they only did it once, and probably for good reason, just to kind of prove a point, like it's possible. Um, but yeah, I mean, it definitely matters in some sense. Like, yeah, there's going to be a certain quality limit with whatever gear you have. You just have to figure out, like, I was shooting weddings with a 5D Mark II, and Like now that's like, to a lot of people, that's like a garbage camera, but I was still able to make beautiful films that people love and they still cherish. And it's just like, there's value in that. And you can do your absolute best to make sure the composition is amazing, make sure your audio isn't peaking, make sure you're not blowing out the highlights in the image. You know, like there's all these technical things you could be doing with a cheaper camera or cheaper gear, but if you're doing it with intentionality, it looks much better than just like someone who's shooting on auto and just not really caring, you know, with a cheap camera.
I mean, you shoot on auto with my Canon G7X. I'm just like, because like I'm just like, I don't know why, but like yeah, I do.
Yeah. Yeah. And just taking the time to sit down and go, okay, let me learn the 180 rule with shutter, and what's going to happen if I crank my ISO all the way up here. How shallow can I shoot with depth of field with my aperture? I don't like going through all those basics, like the big three, and just evaluating like what does each one do, and then knowing them like the back hand, you get put in scenarios where you need to make a quick adjustment, but your brain is just like another language. You're just like, and then you have a solid, beautiful image because you know the camera and you know your settings.
Have you ever like shot a wedding and then realized you were like in the wrong settings?
Yeah, I've nothing catastrophic, like nothing that ruined really anything. But yeah, there's times where like I'll film speeches in 60 frames per second instead of 24, which is slow motion. But like you could still drop frames and kind of fix it in post. Like only a filmmaker would look at it and be like, that's not true, 24 frames per second. Little things like that, nothing crazy. My biggest thing is I have backups. Like every time I film a wedding, I always have a second filmmaker with me. I always have like 2 or 3 sources of audio going so that when one inevitably fails, I have a backup, you know, a third camera sitting on a tripod, that kind of stuff, so that all the bases are covered if one thing fails. And that's always just helped me. And that goes the same with backups, you know, like I'm sitting here and it's just like, this is my life, just sitting on my desk, hard drives on hard drives, you know, and backing things up in 3 places all the time.
Yeah, because like I've had a couple podcasts just like completely lost.
Yeah.
And I like to tell the quick stories. They're very short. Like I had got a new computer in September, and then it was working perfectly. And then after I came back from a trip, it worked for one day, and then it just turned off. Everything was lost. I lost a podcast that I had edited, a course I was taking, like a music course, everything. And then I recorded the podcast with the guy again. Then this time I shipped into Dropbox. And then the computer shut down again. And then it did that 4 times. And the worst thing, it was like I had to use an old computer, which was working better than the new computer, which was supposed to be a lot better, which is very weird.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, they would always say, "Oh, it'll be done in 3 days." Then they'd say, "Give me 2 weeks," and then 2 days will be done. And then they'd say, 2 days, no, two more days, 2 more days. Then they wouldn't let me know when it was done. And it was just like so horrible. And 4 times. It was supposed to be fixed, but it wasn't fixed. Yeah. And then I went to the US and then they just gave me the new model, like for just $50 more. And then it's working perfectly. Hoping nothing happens.
Yeah, backing up your stuff is so important. In case if you lose anything, you have the backups to go back to.
That was like I learned to like save it on my computer normally and into Dropbox. Like right after I'm done with this interview, it's going straight into Dropbox.
Yep, keep it online. Yeah, another horror story we had was 2 days after a wedding, we did a little portrait session with a wedding couple in Hawaii. And we had packed our entire car because we were heading to the airport after shooting. And we got done with the morning session and we came back down and our rental car got smashed and they took my backpack. So one copy of the wedding that we shot 2 days ago was saved on a drive in that backpack along with my wife's laptop. And it was gone, but thankfully I had it backed up in 2 other places. So it was totally fine. Yeah.
Oh my God. That must be
Yeah.
like the worst thing ever.
Yep. Whenever I'm traveling, I always make sure that my copies of the weddings are in two different places at all times for that circumstance. Like if my Airbnb or hotel or whatever burns down, I have it in my backpack. Or if my backpack gets stolen, it's back at the Airbnb. So
And
always just
like
thinking of that stuff.
with the podcast, you can easily re-record it. But
Right.
with the wedding, like
Can't do it with a
you're
wedding.
not gonna like do it again just to like get it
Nope.
just right again.
Yep.
Which is a bigger problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, for the last question, would you have wanted to start like YouTube or your photography business earlier, or are you happy with the time you started at?
I'm really happy with when I started it. I think I started all of it before it was kind of a popular thing to do, and I wouldn't have understood the foresight of like how much that meant. But I do have friends who are just starting in YouTube now who are constantly saying like, "Oh man, I wish I just would have started 2 or 3 years ago, like when I had started." Um, you're always going to say that about things. So ultimately, I think as long as you're dedicated to what you're doing, you're going to find success in it. If you show up and put the best you can into something, like for me, I'm going to start transitioning into more real estate, like buying properties and doing Airbnb and that kind of stuff, and making some content about that. But I know that my wife and I will be dedicated to doing that, and it doesn't matter if we started too late. Tons of people will probably tell you that you're starting too late in doing Airbnb, but I know if we have a different approach, we make our properties look different, we market it in a different way, it'll be successful if we show up,
Yeah, and maybe
um,
even more successful than people who have been doing it for a long time.
totally. And there's people on YouTube that you see rise up quickly. Eric is like one of those guys where, it's like he made a point. It's like whether I don't know about the content. It's like I would never make that kind of content, but it's just like it's possible. It's definitely possible. It's hard, but showing up and being consistent is definitely a key to making it happen. So yeah.
Yeah. I feel like with the starting earlier thing, like for me, impossible for me to start
You should have
earlier.
started
Like,
so much earlier, Nico.
yeah,
You should have been like 3 years old. You should have
yeah,
started.
like 3-year-old Nico should be like running around the house, like making YouTube videos. Like,
Oh man.
but yeah, like I could not have started earlier. And like the things a lot of people say, my friends say, oh, if I were doing YouTube, I would have gotten a lot more subscribers than you like right now, which is like probably not true. Like,
Yeah, but you didn't.
like no 5-year-old's gonna have like 10,000 subscribers. Like because
Sure.
I was doing everything by myself. Like
Yeah.
no 5-year-old's gonna have like millions of views on YouTube and stuff like that. But yeah.
And you don't need to, Nico, you don't have to feel the pressure right now to have to perform a certain
No,
way. Like
yeah.
now is an amazing time in your life where you get to experiment with the things that you
Mhm.
want to do. And like you don't need to worry about that until you're an adult. Like you don't have
Yeah.
to worry about how you're gonna pay the bills until you're an adult. Like just
Like
have fun. Just have
right
fun doing
now,
it now.
I'm like happy with like the amount of subscribers. And
Great.
it's just like enough for me when people say you deserve 50,000 subscribers. That's enough. Like
Hmm.
I've had like 3 people say that to me like the past month, and it's
Hmm.
enough. Like I'm beyond happy with that.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
But anyways, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Of course.
This really means a lot. Before we end, do you have anything you want to promote?
Well, nothing right now, really. I always have a Patreon going. So if you're interested in wedding photography and filmmaking content and more of it, I have a Patreon. It's listed in pretty much all my YouTube videos. I will have presets and LUTs coming out this year, like a typical YouTuber does. And we're planning on doing a course that's going to drop in the middle of October, only for a week, I think. So yeah,
What's the
it's on the
course
horizon.
about? Can you say?
Yep, it's a full course on wedding photography, and then another one on wedding filmmaking.
Oh,
Basically,
cool.
exactly how to run the business, all of the logistical things, all the creative stuff that I do, all of my editing, and then I'm actually going to get into like what most people don't in these kinds of workshops is what's your 5 to 10 year plan? Like, what do you plan on doing once, because the average person tends to burn out of wedding photography and filmmaking in like the 4 to 7 year window. And so I want to start teaching people like when you have a successful wedding photography, wedding filmmaking business, what can you do 10 years from then? How can you set yourself up for success into your 30s and your 40s and your 50s? How can you invest your money and buy a house and like all those things? So yeah.
Yeah. Your YouTube channel, your Patreon, and when the course comes out, if I remember, I'll link in the description.
Thanks, man.
It might be out by then because it's coming out sometime in like September, but not sure. But yeah. Anyways, thank you so much for coming on. This really means a lot, and I'll see you next episode of the Nicocast.